All right. Welcome, everybody. So I'm just going to give my basic reaction to the speech to Congress that Donald Trump just gave. So yeah. Um, I'm just going to give you my reaction. I watched some of it before I went on with Milhan. I just watched the rest of it, made some notes. But yeah, and then if you all have any questions for me or comments or whatnot, I'll be answering them. But I'll just give you my overall reaction. So any super chat questions, Rumble rant questions you got, send them my way. All right. First thing first on the Democrats. The Democrat reaction to Trump's speech, we saw Al Green get dragged out of the hall waving his cane. How they sat there and didn't stand up for Trump. Trump had that moment where he chided them for how hostile they were being and how that's not right. I want you all to remember that George W. Bush was also a Republican. And George W. Bush was president of the United States. And George W. Bush invaded Iraq by lying to the American people and lying to the world about weapons of mass destruction. And 100,000 people immediately died. And the ultimate result was probably millions of deaths. Thousands of U.S. soldiers died. George W. Bush also, we know he tortured people. George W. Bush violated civil liberties in a very big way with wiretapping and all of that. And yet, the Democrats gave Bush standing ovations at his State of the Union address every single time. And you can't underestimate that every time George W. Bush got up there, despite lying and starting a war and invading a country, killing thousands and thousands and thousands of innocent people in Iraq, getting all kinds of soldiers, American soldiers killed. Iraq has been messed up ever since. It's because of the instability brought in by the United States that ISIS emerged in Iraq. All of that was done by George W. Bush. And the Democrats had absolutely no problem giving George W. Bush a standing ovation. And in fact, they like Bush now because he's against Donald Trump, because he's criticized Donald Trump. So tell me what Donald Trump has done that is so egregious in comparison to George W. Bush that they had to sit there the whole time, that they boycotted the speech, that they, Alan Green got dragged out for waving his cane. What has Trump done in his first term, in the first 100 days of his second term? What has he done that is anywhere near what George W. Bush did? And that right there tells you that Trump derangement syndrome is coming from a bad place. And there are people who refuse to believe that for very opportunistic reasons. Look, I don't agree with a lot of what Trump said tonight. I agree with some of it, and I think some of it was very good. Some of it was not so good, and we'll get into that. But we have to start with this understanding. Trump derangement syndrome comes from a place of evil. That the conversation has got to start with that. The idea that Donald Trump is Hitler, that Donald Trump is the worst president ever and all of that, that is not coming from people who want peace in this world. It is not coming from people who want freedom of speech in this world. It is not coming from people who want the FBI to not drag people away. It's not coming from a good place. And the fact that George W. Bush got standing ovation after standing ovation from the Democrats, but Trump got this treatment from the mainstream media and from the Democrats, that has to be acknowledged. That we can criticize Trump, and I will criticize Trump to some degree tonight. I absolutely will. But Trump derangement syndrome comes from Satan. It comes from the devil. It comes from imperialism. It comes from the imperialist globalist system that sees Donald Trump as a threat to their system and does not like what Donald Trump might do for good. And that you can't make Trump derangement syndrome about what you want it to be about. Because, look, there's plenty to disagree with about Trump. But you can't make it into, you can't claim that CNN's hostility to Trump and those Democrats waving their cane at Trump, you can't pretend that that's about your pet issue, that that's about the fact that he's not enacted Medicare for all, that that's about the rights of immigrant workers. You can't pretend that. Trump derangement syndrome comes from Satan. It comes from imperialism. It comes from globalism. It comes from the Ukrainiacs and the warmongers. It comes from the FBI. That's where it comes from. And if you are in denial about that, if you're doing otherwise, if you're pretending otherwise, I am not happy with you. And our conversation tonight about Trump's State of the Union address needs to begin with that understanding that the singling out of Donald Trump, the way he was impeached twice when he was in office, the way that he faced 2 attempted assassinations on the campaign trail, one of which was done by a Ukraine nut job, the other of which we don't know who the perpetrator, what their motivations were. But the fact that Donald Trump has faced the kind of opposition that he's faced, that he's been singled out the way he's been singled out, that comes from the enemy. That comes from the enemy. And any criticism that we make of Donald Trump, which there will be some criticism of Trump that comes out of my mouth tonight, comes from understanding that I am with Trump against Trump derangement syndrome. Right? That I might disagree with Trump. I think when he murdered Qasem Soleimani during his first term, that was horrendous. I don't support his support for Israel. There were plenty of things he said tonight that I disagree with, but I am not with the globalist, imperialist, Trump derangement opposition movement. And I refuse to opportunistically join with it for my own gain. I refuse to do that. I see Trump as taking some very, very important moves that will benefit the struggles of working families in this country and the struggle for peace globally. And I see those moves as why he is being targeted. Look, the world is run by very, very evil forces. And Donald Trump is in there and he's trying to do a few good things amid a lot of other things that I'm not thrilled with. He's trying to do a couple good things, and they are ready to fight him like you wouldn't believe because he's trying to do those couple good things. And I would like to see those couple good things come into existence. And I know the Democrats will never deliver those good things. So first things first, yes, Dan Niswander, he did say working families at one point. That's interesting, isn't it? You know, as far as the speech, so a couple things just stand out. I'm just going to react to just a couple things in the speech, and then I'll take any super chat questions y'all got, and we'll go from there. The government waste part. Now, he did a really good job of illustrating that the U.S. government has been funding leftist political activism around the world. He didn't do it in the most sensitive way. And I would have used different words than he did, right? Because, the president of the United States has to be remembered. He has to remember that the whole world is watching, right? And that it is absolutely disgusting that our tax dollars have been spent in funding all kinds of woke activism around the world, which is for imperialism. It's for destabilizing countries. It's for sowing unrest. It's for feeding the color revolution apparatus. And he exposed that. Now, he didn't have to say that, what, the African country, no one's ever heard of it, or, he didn't have to say it that way. And the issue isn't that it was, these woke causes that were getting the funding. That's not the issue. The issue is this was the American government using taxpayer dollars to fund activism and fund movements that are intended to serve political causes that serve imperialism. That's the issue, right? And I'm sure there's plenty of conservative entities that get support, right? The issue isn't that these causes are liberal or conservative. The issue is that this is imperialist soft power. And that's what USAID was engaged in. And, that this is what has ruined leftist politics in America. I mean, the communist groups don't believe in communism at this point. They believe in wokeism because they're chasing after those same foundations, that same amount of foundation money, et cetera. And that Donald Trump was listing off all the funding of liberal activism that went on the Democrat, that went on from USAID and other places. And he was pointing to a real scandal. I agree with him. I don't agree with exactly how he framed it, but that's how Donald Trump was going to frame it to his supporters. The tariffs. Look, the tariffs and government waste. The government waste part, here's the problem. All right. And this is my issue with the Doge. Okay. Is that, you can say, okay, the government is wasteful. You can say a lot of these government jobs are unnecessary. But what he's not saying is that if all these federal employees lose their jobs, where does all that money go into the economy? And I have said over and over and over again, you cannot cut your way into economic growth. And I mean, this is going to have to be a CPI slogan that we use everywhere. You cannot cut your way into economic growth. And sure, is there a lot of waste in the government bureaucracies that exist? Absolutely. Are the government bureaucracies that exist, are they suppressing business owners? Are they rigging things for the big monopolies? Absolutely. But if you just get rid of hundreds of thousands of government employees and all these people that were making large salaries, spending that money, if they all of a sudden all that money is not in the U.S. economy, that's not going to have a good result. And there is a lot of libertarian flim-flam economics that will tell you, oh yeah, well, there would never be any monopolies if it wasn't for the government and government spending, government, I've heard, a really common libertarian argument, government jobs can only create more government jobs. That's not true, right? If someone's working for the government, they then take their tax dollars, they spend it at the supermarket. That creates jobs for supermarket workers. They spend it at the toy store. That, creates jobs for toy manufacturers, toy store employees. But this is libertarianism, is an economic flim-flam. Right, where libertarian economists get up there and they say stupid shit like this, that, government jobs can only ever create government jobs. That's not actually true. Actually, government spending does create lots of jobs outside of the government. Oh, there would be no monopolies if it wasn't for the government. Actually, there's what's called natural monopolies, that the market creates monopolies naturally, and the government has created all kinds of antitrust legislation to try and prevent the rise of monopolies. And that libertarian, Austrian school, Chicago school, flim-flam economics, they don't know how to create economic growth. At the end of the day, the only way the economy expands is if physical economy expands, right? Is if there is a rise in the value that is being created. If you're building more roads, you're building more highways, you're producing more products, if the wages and the living standards of people are rising, the economy grows. If you just raise the profit margin, and if you just lower the taxes on rich people, that doesn't create economic growth. And if the stock market just gets bigger and keeps rising, and the derivative rip-off schemes and the bets on the stock market are doing well, that's not real economic growth. The only way you have real economic growth is if more value in physical economy is being created and living standards rise. That's how you get economic growth. And the Doge and the government waste stuff, I'm happy to see the FBI get restricted. I'm absolutely happy to see that. I'm happy to see USAID not be able to do the nefarious schemes that they're carrying out. But I'm telling you, you cannot cut your way into economic growth. You cannot cut your way into economic growth. And the tariffs, are they going to bring jobs back to America? Maybe a little bit. But the biggest jobs killer is not offshoring. I'll let you in on a little secret. Steel manufacturing in America. All right, sure, there's a lot of steel manufacturing that goes on in other countries. That's true. But the reason that there's fewer steel manufacturing jobs in America is because of technology. Because it used to require thousands and thousands of people in the 1950s to work in a steel mill. Now a steel mill can produce the exact same amount of steel, if not more, with less than 100 employees. The biggest jobs killer is technology. And what's happening with AI and all of that, it all points to what I talk about on these streams endlessly. The tendency of the falling rate of profit, the value crisis, and the problem of overproduction. That in an economy where profits are in command, technological advances lead to greater poverty. That there's always more products created than wages are paid out in the process of production. And the worker can never buy back what he produces. And technology exacerbates this problem, and it makes the rate of profit decrease. The fewer workers that are hired, the less spending power they have, and the less surplus value the employer is able to extract. And the problem of overproduction gets exacerbated by the tendency of the falling rate of profit, and you have gluts on the market. And that's what happens. And this is the problem hanging over the entire Western economy right now. And Joe Biden and his faction, their solution to it was Malthusian. They said, we're going to get the government and we're just going to forcibly degrow. And the reason that there was such a rise in the price of eggs and the price of agricultural commodities is because Joe Biden was actively trying to reduce global crop outputs. And that's what the Biden administration was doing all over the world. They were actively trying to reduce the amount of food that was produced in the world. And Trump is obviously not in favor of that. And I don't think reducing the amount of food in a time where there are people on the African continent that are malnourished, and I don't think that's a good thing to do. But that was the policy of the Biden administration. In the name of environmentalism, in the name of climate change or whatnot, they were actively trying to reduce the amount of food in the world. And the European farmers revolted against it, and Sri Lanka was devastated by it. And that fits in with what Trump spoke about in his speech about the power plants. Our energy grid in the United States is falling apart, and the Biden administration, their policy wasn't to build new power plants. It was to make it worse. They basically declared war on the power grid, of the United States. And they tried to dismantle the power grid. And that Trump doesn't believe in that. Trump wants to make a lot of money. If you want to have a strong economy, you want to make a lot of money, you need a power grid. And the Biden administration and their solution to technology creating an economic crisis was forcible degrowth. Trump's solution is privatize everything. Privatize everything. Get the government out. It's not going to work. It's not going to work. And if there's a dramatic economic fallout, that is going to hurt Donald Trump, and it could set the stage for a coup against him. Right? And that's what I fear. He's taking very, very dramatic moves to reduce the spending power of the American public. If you just get rid of all these good paying jobs, You know, if you get rid of all these good paying jobs, and there's going to be an economic fallout. DC is already experiencing the economic fallout as a result of federal employees losing their jobs, et cetera. And this is not good. This is not good. And you know, the long-term economic consequences are not going to be good. That said, I also want to emphasize that China is an economic powerhouse right now. They're streaming ahead, and cutting ourselves off from China, isolating ourselves from China, demonizing China, putting up more tariffs against China, that's not going to help America in the long term, because China is the main source of economic growth in the world right now. China is the linchpin of the BRICS emerging alternative economy. And China is speeding ahead. And if America is going to have a future, we need to attach ourselves to China. We need to attach ourselves to the new economy. It's rising. So, you know, I'm seeing opposition to the Malthusian degrowth apparatus. I'm seeing opposition to the imperialist monopolies and their schemes, and I'm seeing opposition to their geopolitical maneuvering. But I'm also seeing economic policies that are going to have a very, very serious fallout, and that concerns me. The immigration stuff. What concerned me about the immigration stuff? Well, first of all, I want to point out this gang from Venezuela is an anti-Maduro gang, all right? And you cannot repeat that point enough. They're a gang that tried to overthrow Maduro. They're one of the biggest enemies of the socialist government of Venezuela. And of course, mainstream media doesn't want you to know that. Mainstream media would have you believe that somehow Maduro supports the Venezuelan gang or something like that. This horrendous criminal organization from Venezuela is one of the main enemies of the socialist government that Trump has just designated as a terrorist group, and that, you know, that's who the American deep state works with against socialist countries. For example, in the 1980s, the USA armed the Contras, the people who brought crack cocaine to the United States and brought in the crack epidemic. They were funded to fight the socialist government of Nicaragua. And that these folks are thugs and murderers, and they do horrendous things. And they're also pro-imperialist. And that's why they got visas and got welcomed into the country. And they're on the side of Juan Guaido, and they're against Maduro. And, you know, they're a prison gang because Maduro threw them all in prison. So, you know, somebody needs to stand up and point this out. And the right, they hate communism, and, you know, they just blame everything bad is communist. And this group is from Venezuela, and they're bad, so they must be communists. And the left, they're too busy screaming, racist, racist. They won't point out that, look, I mean, everything Trump is saying about this Venezuelan gang is true. There's some evil motherfuckers. But they're anti-communists. They're pro-U.S. imperialists. They're pro-USAD. They're regime change people. And I'm the only, this is why CPI and this YouTube channel exists. I'm the only one who's brave enough to say that, right? The right wing, they do their thing. The left wing, they have Trump derangement syndrome. They don't care about Venezuela. They just want to say racist, right? Well, no. This evil gang that Trump is absolutely correct in pointing out as evil is anti-Maduro. Let's just point that out. I mean, and that should be obvious, but because mainstream media lies about Venezuela, it's not obvious. And, you know, Trump and Maduro should team up to fight this gang. And, you know, they're terrorists, right? They're designated terrorists. Why don't the U.S. government and the Venezuelan government should have a joint anti-terrorism operation to wipe out this gang? Why not that? Why doesn't Maduro and Trump, they should have an anti-terrorism summit, and they should get together and they should fight the gang. That's not going to happen, I don't think, but I'd like to see that. And if Trump is serious about opposing this gang, he should do that. Team up with Maduro to fight the gang. Works for me, right? And again, the left will never call for that. They just want to call Trump racist. And the right doesn't, just refuses to acknowledge that this horrendous gang is anti-Maduro. Well, that's why I'm here. I'm here to say this. And that's why I'm so persecuted. And that's why they have done everything they can to smear my reputation and destroy me, because I'm the only person who's brave enough to point out this bloodthirsty criminal organization that Trump talks about is anti-Maduro. I'm the only one who's brave enough to say that. None of the socialist and communist groups will say that because they're too busy. They're too busy tailing after the pro-imperialist Democrats and Trump derangement syndrome and identity politics to say that. And no one on the right is going to say that because they all think communism is evil and the gang is evil, so they must be communists. I'm the only one who's brave enough to say that. And this is why this fits a pattern, right? Where I say things that are obvious and should be true that don't fit the red blue team narrative. And that's why I am continually demonized and persecuted. I am willing to say things that don't fit the script of either side. And I'm willing to just point things out. And the left hates my guts for it because I won't just be a stupid woke. Right? I believe in anti-imperialism. I believe we need a government of action to fight for working families. I won't go along with Malthusianism. And the right, they're also confused because I certainly don't believe in free market policies, and I don't believe in cutting government spending. I don't believe in lifting protections for workers, etc. So I represent, and the Center for Political Innovation, we represent the anti-imperialist, pro-growth, pro-humanity trend. And we are, to some degree or other, standing alone. But sometimes you have to stand alone. You have to stand alone for what's right. And I will continue to do that. And the efforts to sabotage and destroy me are massive. You saw 15 people protesting outside of our tiny little workshop we had in Minneapolis. Like, the efforts to destroy me are massive, right? And they've boosted people who sound kind of like us, and are basically just imitators who don't understand what they're talking about. They have gone out of their way. They have gone out of their way to try and prevent anyone from listening to me and anyone from listening to the Center for Political Innovation, because we're saying what no one else will say. And that Venezuelan gang is a great example of this. Couple other things I wanted to comment on. The Golden Dome. Right? Now, the Golden Dome, that sounds great. Right? It sounds great, right? Why don't we have a missile system to protect us from being hit by missiles? Now, on the surface, that sounds great. However, I'm not into it, and I'll tell you why. That's called, that is strike enabling. That's an escalation. All right? Now, you might not think that that's an escalation. You might think, well, Caleb, shouldn't we just have everything in our power to make sure that we never get hit by foreign missiles and foreign things? That's not how the Cold War works, right? You all need to go back to the 1980s and read some of what was written at the time of Ronald Reagan, at the time of Jimmy Carter, etc. The way nuclear war works is that, you don't nuke somebody because they can nuke you, right? The Soviet Union was never going to nuke the United States. They always had a no first strike policy. And the United States was never going to nuke the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union had the ability to retaliate. And so throughout the Cold War, there was an effort to build defense systems that were, quote, strike enabling, meaning that the United States would build up a missile defense system so that they could nuke Russia, and then Russia wouldn't be able to strike back because they would be able to block it off with their missile defense system. So then Russia has to build their own missile defense system, right? And so then and this is how the arms race works, right? Is that a defense system enables you to strike and deflect any retaliation. And that then becomes a threat on any country. Right? And that doesn't seem on the surface like it's an act of aggression. Oh, we just want to protect ourselves, but it enables us to strike and our enemies to not retaliate. And so then our enemies are going to have to build their own system so that they can strike, and they're going to have to find ways to penetrate it. And this is all an escalation, right? The road to peace is not a nuclear arms race. All right. You don't get peace by investing in armaments. You don't get peace by building bigger weapons systems. And that, yeah, it sounds great to have a system that would keep us all safe. And I would like that. I would like to make sure that every American family is protected from nuclear missiles, etc. But what this would do is it would be strike enabling, and it would be a big escalation against every other nuclear armed country in the world. They would then have to build such a system. They would then develop weapons that can break through such a system, and then we would have to develop those weapons. And this is the road in a bad direction. This is the Cold War. This is the nuclear arms race, and we don't want to get back to that. So this Golden Dome thing, not a good idea. Not a good idea. All right. Again, might not be the popular thing to say, but if you look at how international arms deals and nuclear arms races work, not a good idea. Now, I liked hearing that Russia is ready for peace, and that is the truth. Russia has been ready for peace since the beginning of the conflict. They've wanted to negotiate since the beginning. They held off going into Ukraine. They could have gone in 2014, and they would have been totally justified to go into Donbass in 2014. And that's what the people of Donbass wanted them to do. When the Donbass People's Republics, the Donetsk People's Republic, the Lugansk People's Republic, when they were formed, they immediately wanted Russia to recognize them and send troops in. And Russia held off. And they did the Minsk Agreement. And they did the Minsk Agreement, and they held off. And Russia did everything they could to avoid going into Ukraine. What Trump said about Afghanistan, I mean, Biden certainly mismanaged the pullout of Afghanistan. And the U.S. occupied Afghanistan for 20 years and didn't create peace. But that said, the idea that the mismanaged pullout of Afghanistan is what made Putin invade Ukraine, that's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. There is no link between those two events, right? There's absolutely no link between those two events. And that Russia held off moving into Ukraine as long as they possibly could, and they did it basically at the point where they had no choice. They had to go in. And you know, I'm disappointed to hear that kind of rhetoric from Trump, but I'm happy to hear him say that he wants to end this war. He wants to end the Ukraine war. He says he got kind of a letter that sounds almost apologetic from Zelensky, saying that they're ready to negotiate. The Ukrainian people want to negotiate. So, that's all good. And I mean, talk is that the sanctions on RT will be lifted soon. That's what Ben Swan was saying. I showed the clip on the last stream. And so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for the negotiations. At the end of Trump's speech, he's talked about going to Mars. I am all about the space program. That sounds absolutely awesome. And the golden age of America, right? And this is Donald Trump, right? He was really into Dr. Norman Vincent Peale and the power of positive thinking. He's really into Paula White Cain. Who Paula White, is his spiritual advisor. She's all about, the power of positive thinking and, new thought, etc., new thought spirituality. And that's how Donald Trump approaches things. And he very much ties into the pioneer heritage and all of that. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And, I point people toward Anna Louise Strong and the pro-growth vision, when she talked about the 5-year plans of Russia having the American spirit. And I think we need to be optimists, right? And that if socialism is associated with pessimism, socialism is associated with resentment and negativity, I'm not for it. I'm for a government of action that'll fight for working families. We're in a very unique situation right now. We have the Center for Political Innovation. We played a very, very big role in politics in the year of 2024. I mean, I'll just be real about that. We are the ones who talked about Kamala Harris's dad before anybody else. Nobody talked about Kamala Harris's dad. We published a book, CPI book, way before anybody else did. We got the Peace MAGA banner out there. We were out there unfurling the banner of Trump and Kim shaking hands and saying only peace can make America great again. Nobody has done more action in the streets to call for peace and negotiations to end the war in Ukraine than we have. And you can read the really long list that we did. And it's good that Donald Trump won the election. Because if Donald Trump had not won the election, first of all, I think we'd all be in prison right now. They would have found some technicality to throw us in prison. On top of that, I think we'd probably have World War III at this point. We'd be going all in against Russia. And, that Kamala Harris's presidency promised more political repression. It promised more warmongering around the world, etc. So we were right to point to Trump as being, I guess you might say, the lesser of two evils, or the slightly better candidate in this election. And there's a reason the Ukrainians tried to kill him. There's a reason mainstream media was so solidly against him. But that said, his economic policies have the potential to create a really, really big problem down the road. You can't cut your way into economic growth. You can't. And there's a lot of confusion mixed in with the good things he's doing. So, that's my reaction to that speech. I don't want to defend the ineffective government apparatus that we have in the United States right now. I don't want to defend the bureaucracy that destroys the hopes and dreams of Americans. But you're not going to make life better in America by just getting the government out and getting rid of spending. And the biggest jobs killer is not offshoring, it's technology. And that ultimately we need a planned economy. We need a society where the banks, factories, and industries are forced to work in the interest of public good, not the profits of a wealthy few. We need the economy to be planned and organized. We need a government of action that will fight for working families. And we've always put forward a 4-point plan, a mass program to rebuild America, to put people to work, hire millions of people to go out and rebuild this country, high-speed railway, new universities, new schools, new hospitals, etc. 2, create a national bank that injects credit into communities, put banking in the hands of the state so that with the control of the purse and credit strings, we can strategically plan the economy and stimulate economic growth. 4, public control of our natural resources. America's coal, America's oil, America's natural gas, America's timber should be the property of all the people, and the revenue from it should go into the public budget so we can take the burden of taxation off the population. And we can fund all the things that we need to rebuild this country. And 4, an economic bill of rights, the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education, etc. Right? There you go. And that's what we want. And that's what we advocate. And ultimately, that's the solution to the economic crisis we're facing. And the crisis of overproduction and the technology-induced chaos that we are facing. That's only going to be resolved if we have a government of action that fights for working families. And so that's my reaction to the State of the Union. And I will answer any other super chats people have. Thoughts on TSMC coming to Arizona to avoid tariffs? I haven't heard about this. TSMC Arizona. It's a semiconductor corporation. Okay. Look, the way the USA has treated China with regard to semiconductor chips is really dumb. All right. It's really, really dumb. And look, China, when it comes to rare earth minerals, When it comes to all of that, they're way ahead. And the US government is just angry that China produces their own chips. I mean, the US government has actually tried to pass laws telling China they're not allowed to build computer chip factories in China with Chinese employees to supply computer chips to China because the USA said so. I mean, I think the USA should team up with China. Our approach with China is a powerhouse of growth. They have 5-year economic plans. The state mobilizes to build. I think that our approach to China should be, let's collaborate. And fusion energy. China is making huge leaps in terms of fusion energy. We should collaborate with China. The competitive approach to China isn't going to help us. It cuts us off from all of the great wealth expansion happening in China. We are losing out, right? We don't benefit from it. China is speeding ahead. They're not going to slow down or stop anytime soon. And if we make an enemy out of them, we don't benefit from it. This is a big problem in America and American culture, etc., right? If somebody is doing well, that's not an attack on you. If anything, it could be to your benefit. If somebody's doing well and you make friends with them, you can do well also. But this is the way our culture is, all or nothing, right? I'm the one, I'm the chosen one. And look, I know, yes, we've all been raised from the time we were kids to think America's the greatest country in the world, America's the chosen nation, and all of that. Well, the world is changing. The world is changing. The Western imperialist system is in decline. There's a whole section of the world that doesn't have the problems with technology, et cetera, because they have planned economies, because they emerged from anti-colonial revolutions. And we can pivot toward this new economy, or we can go down with the ship, right? The imperialist system is doomed. Rosa Luxemburg predicted this. I'll put this on the screen. It's one of the very, very important. I've shown this. I've quoted this in various speeches, but I just want to point this out again because it's just really, really important. This is what Rosa Luxemburg said at the beginning of World War I. This world war is a regression into barbarism. The triumph of imperialism leads to the annihilation of civilization. At first, this happens sporadically for the duration of modern war, but then when the period of unlimited wars begins, it progresses toward its inevitable consequences. The triumph of imperialism and the collapse of all civilization as in ancient Rome. Depopulation, desolation, degeneration, a great cemetery. The Western imperialist system has entered the era of permanent wars, and now internally, it's fallen out. And Germany and France and Britain and the United States, if we continue to be part of this imperialist system, we're going to deteriorate into barbarism. We're going to be Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. What I like about Trump, and let me point this out, he did talk about Alaska in his speech. I don't know if you saw that. There was a reference to Alaska, and that was good, right? And some of what Trump is saying about Canada and all of that, there's an understanding that the United States needs to pivot eastward. And that's why when we went at the inauguration, we had two big banners. One big banner said, "Only peace can make America great again," had Trump and Kim shaking hands. But we had another big banner that was "Build the Peace Bridge over the Bering Sea, connect the United States to Russia." Right? And that America needs to pivot eastward. If we're going to have a strong economy, we need to pivot eastward. I can't emphasize that enough. If we're going to have a strong economy, we have to pivot to the east. Right? We have to pivot away from the collective West, away from NATO, away from the dying British Empire Western financial system. We need to pivot toward the BRICS. We need to trade with Russia. We need to trade with China. We need to trade with Iran. We need to trade with the rising new economy in the East. And that's the future of America. And that's the future. It's the only possible future we can have. We need a new economy that's tied in with the new world that's rising. We need to leave the Western colonial imperialist financial system behind. And that's just something that is really, really obvious to anyone who knows anything about global trends, anyone who knows about the history of civilizations. The so-called West is dying. And the hope for America is to become part of the new world and restructure our country to not be part of this globalist imperialist system, but rather part of the rising new world. We need to pivot to the east. That's what we need to do. We need to connect the United States toward the new economy that's rising. And Trump seems to be more inclined in that direction than any president we've ever had previously, despite all the shortcomings that we heard tonight. To some degree or other, Trump indicates that he wants to do that. So that's a good thing. And that's why they have Trump derangement syndrome. And that's why they treat him like he's the worst person, the worst candidate, the worst president in history. Because to some degree or other, he understands that there's a lot of money to be made trading with North Korea, a lot of money to be made trading with Russia and China, and that there's not a big future in doubling down and serving the international order set up by NATO. Trump realizes that on some degree. To some degree or other, in his own limited way, he understands that. Plus, he's an optimist, right? He's pro-growth. He's talking about planting a flag on Mars. He's talking about a golden age, and he doesn't want to dismantle the power grid. So there are some redeeming qualities to Trump, and that's why they want to destroy him. And I didn't hear a lot tonight that I liked. I'll be honest. I didn't hear a lot that I appreciated tonight. I wish I'd heard more from Trump that I appreciated. I didn't hear a lot, but that said, the reaction of the establishment to Trump is coming from a bad place. It's coming from a bad place, and it's coming from the fact that amid all the different things we heard tonight, he wants to make peace with Russia. He wants to end the Ukraine war. He wants to pivot the U.S. economy eastward to some degree. He at least wants to break with Europe and move us further away from the European colonizers. And it looks like, to some degree or other, he would like the United States to get in on the rising economy around the world. I'll just end by saying that, you shouldn't judge a politician by what they say. Judge them by what they do. And for no political leader is that more true than Donald Trump. Donald Trump says all kinds of things, some of them very good, some of them very bad, but you judge him by what he did, what he does. And his first term wasn't great, but it would have been a lot worse with Hillary, but it wasn't great, and a lot of bad things happened. This term, there's some hope. There's some hope. I am holding my breath for this Ukraine war to end. This Ukraine war has got to end. A lot is riding on that. Talking about it isn't enough. Shouting at Zelensky is not enough. You got to end this war. You got to sign a deal with Russia. I'm still waiting for those files, right? The Epstein files, the RFK, JFK, MLK assassination files. I'm still waiting on it. Again, there's a lot I'm still waiting on with Trump. But Tulsi Gabbard running our intelligence, Director of National Intelligence, I like that. That sounds good to me. Moving toward peace with Russia sounds pretty good to me. So we'll see. We'll see. And I guess that's what I've got for you all tonight. Ultimately, I guess it really just points to how important the Center for Political Innovation is. Our organization is absolutely unique. Nobody does what we do. Nobody comes even close. Our pro-growth, pro-American, optimistic, anti-globalist, anti-imperialist message, our message of a government of action that fights for working families, nobody does what we do. And the role that we have played in American politics, despite our small numbers, is astounding. We have been the main voice for peace with Russia. We have been the main voice pushing the peace aspect of the Trump administration. We exposed Kamala Harris. We are the only ones with common sense, the only ones putting forward a pro-humanity, pro-working families message. We're not for austerity and cuts in government services, but we're not for degrowth and Malthusianism. We have a message that is actually serious and could actually win. So join the Center for Political Innovation. That's what come to our workshop in LA that's happening. Los Angeles, I'm headed to Los Angeles April 19th. We're having a workshop. We just had a planning meeting about it tonight. Come to our national convention that'll be happening in Chicago in July. Get involved in this organization. Get involved because we play a very important role, and no one does what we're doing. So join. Come to our convention. Get involved in our operations to promote anti-globalism, anti-imperialism, to stand with people who are under attack. Nobody did more to stand with the Uhuru movement than we did. So, yeah, join the Center for Political Innovation. Dare to struggle, dare to win. And that's all, folks. That's all.